For every business challenge, there's a solution. The Big Small Business Show is made possible by MTN Business.
And by Chartered Accountants of South Africa. Lead your industry with a responsible partner. Partner with the CASA today.
This is the Big Small Business Show, the show for you, our entrepreneurs, at every stage of your entrepreneurial journey. Now, recently we had the budget speech, we had the SONA speech, and today, instead of having our entrepreneur on our panel, we are going to have two regular SAICA members, Pieter Faber and Sharon Smulders, both with very big titles from SAICA, are in studio to unpack the budget speech and the SONA speech with us, and more importantly, how it impacts you and I as entrepreneurs. Welcome to you both.
Thank you. Thank you, Alan.
Right, so let's start off with the more recent budget speech. You know, when I looked at that, or read and listened to it, I was looking for stuff that related to small businesses, and normally it's had quite a focus, but this year, did I miss something? Did I miss a couple of pages, or was there nothing there?
Unfortunately not. There's been a few transfers to the Department of Small Business Development, and I think that's the problem that we have, is a lot of money is going there, but we're not seeing that being used. I've spoken to a lot of people on the ground, and they're saying we can see that money is going to this department, but a lot of it is going to the Small Enterprise Financing Agency as well as the Small Enterprise Development Agency, and that's where the money is actually lying and where the actual implementation is meant to be happening. But other than that, not much. No change in the VAT rate. We would have hoped it to go up, you know, to alleviate some of the compliance burden. What he did mention, which is...
just say that again, you would have hoped that it went up.
Well, yeah, to make the compliance burden less. So people are moaning that VAT is the most burdensome to comply with. It's the most costly to comply with for a small business, although it is interesting that the stats say that 80% of the people that actually are registered are voluntarily registered of the small businesses. So there is a bit of a mismatch there, that people register despite the fact that they don't have to.
Just Peter, just coming back to VAT, we look at our relative VAT rate in South Africa now, we're at 15%, right? 15%. So if you look at other countries particularly the developing world, or maybe the equivalent, how do we relate to them in terms of that number? Because in Europe it's as high as 18, 19%.
20% in UK, etc. So I think the global average is something like 17%. Even in Africa, it's sitting at close to that. So I think the pure VAT as a transactional tax is a lot easier to collect, where we've used it as a political instrument of progressiveness. I think there it's more of a question of efficiency. So how is it easier? It's easier just to tax transactions than to impose it on something that needs to be calculated, like taxable income.
Okay, so from your perspective, from a small business point of view, did you pick up anything that Sharon didn't pick up?
Yeah, there wasn't. I think this year there wasn't that much on a very microeconomic level, but on a macro thing, to me, there's one big thing. It's the policy rethinking on the low rate broad base, which is essentially saying we need to tax a lot more people but at a lot lesser rate. And that probably will move down to small businesses as well, so saying that we need to cut the rates there as well as a general, but also whether that transcends corporate and actually goes to individuals, like we've seen in New Zealand, etc., that cut their individual rate from 55% to 33%, and you actually start incentivizing people going into business. And I think that's always been a criticism I've had of government, is you write policy documents and that you require policy coherency and saying we want small business, but then we incentivize employment. And we say no, but you need to have the same return on your investment for small business and employment, but they don't have the same risks. It's a lot more risk and a lot more difficult to run a small business. So I think that to me was one of the big things that from a policy change. The other is obviously, I think, which is not directly related to small business, but something that probably impacts small business the most, is crime. So we saw that in SONA. We saw a lot of speaking. There was a few factors on increasing police and etc. Once again, we are a bit concerned that there is not much overall policy coherence on the whole criminal justice system, because crime just affects small business a lot. Whether you travel to Europe, China, etc., being able to get goods and people cheaply together is what small businesses thrive off. And if you can't do that, you end up like us, where you pay the same for getting a parcel from Joburg to Pretoria. I can do at a tenth of the cost, get a package from China. So the cost of logistics and also getting to people, we got this creation called malls, which is very expensive to do business. You go into Europe, you go into China, you go into Australia, the streets are littered with small businesses, and the rentals are low because you can start them in any area because it's safe and it's cheap to do business. South Africa doesn't have that benefit, and I think once we have a coherent criminal justice system, which the president does allude to, and that they are starting to get to it, that is another thing that I think, so once again, not necessarily directly related to small business from a budget perspective, but more money going into that area.
There was an intimation by the minister that the tax rate for small business would be reduced.
So that was reduced, but very small. So no change in the turnover tax rate. That stayed exactly the same. But small businesses, the brackets were changed, the percentages were changed slightly. Really not much. A small business can help a small business.
And speaking about reductions in the future as well, but quite
elusive,
non-descriptive.
I've no idea where that's going. But I mean, they did mention the starting a business issue, where they are trying to improve it and make it easier to start a business, such as the paying tax, World Bank paying tax initiative that they started, where the president wants us to come in the top 50 in the world. We're way below that at the moment. So starting a new business with CIPC on their Biz portal, you can now register for employees tax, UIF, SDL, workman's compensation, start a bank account, all that sort of thing within a few hours, which is fantastic. So we must commend them on that.
Well, it's easy. My whole contention about ease of doing business is that the entrepreneurs where we want to start will start anyway. They'll just be non-compliant, right? And then they'll pop into compliance at a point where it's too painful.
And I think that's the big challenge. When you look at any startup, it's that popping into, so once you've grown organically big enough that you now actually need to access market capital, etc., tax compliance becomes an issue.
Yeah.
And that's where you start hitting a snag, because the system as it currently stands is you'll probably bankrupt yourself getting compliant. And I think that is the big concern, is small business will carry on. But as soon as they become big enough, and that's why the conversion rate never happens, because once you get into the formal economy, you need to get your books in order. And to do that just doesn't become economically sound. And I think that probably is a challenge in itself that we probably need from a tax system point of view, is if you aren't going to make it simple, you're going to sit with this, and you aren't going to organically. But even just from a tax perspective, if you just look at, when we're talking, tax is actually not a very good mechanism for small business. Why? Because they don't pay much tax. So if you look at the small business incentive, it actually decreased by about 500 million, from only 2.8 billion to 2.3 billion, which shows the pressure on profits for small business. But if you look at them forfeiting, essentially government forfeiting 2.3 billion in a 1.8 trillion rand budget, small businesses don't generate a lot of tax revenue. They generate economic activity, which is something different.
We're going to have to take a break now. When we come back, we're going to continue the conversation with Pieter and Sharon, and we're going to extend our mandate to talking about SONA.